to season 2 of the Real Ethereal show. So exciting, you guys. My first episode is going to be about Mercury in retrograde. And I know a lot of people think that they know about Mercury in retrograde, but there's a lot of depth to it, and there's a lot of interesting information that I hope I included that's going to teach you guys some new things. And also how not to dread it, how to mitigate its effects, but also how to use it to your benefit. So I think it's going to be a really fun show if you guys watch. Also, go to the Lighter Side Network Facebook page, you guys, because a lot of live feeds come on the Lighter Side Network. You hear things first on the Facebook page. So please like us on Facebook. And the other thing is I've redesigned lauraboone.org, my website, lauraboone.org. So if you want to binge my shows, you can click right through to the network from lauraboone.org. So I thank you guys for watching, and thanks for supporting me. So now I have a second season. It's been really wonderful to get to know all of you guys, and I'm super excited about what's to come. It's going to be a great, great season. So let's talk about in 2017, the next two Mercury in retrogrades. One we're in right now. It goes from August 12th to September 5th, and it is in Virgo. The next one after that is December 3rd to December 22nd, and that is in, obviously, Sagittarius. So we're going to talk about what all that means. First of all, what does retrograde mean? What does that even mean? Retrograde, first of all, planets do not really go backwards. A lot of people think, oh, does that mean that it's going backwards? No, they never go backwards. They always move in an ellipse around the sun. Planets in retrograde actually only reference the visual nature of what is going on. So astrologers from centuries ago didn't know about ellipses and the solar system. So what they were measuring was visually what they saw. And what that means is when a planet, and by the way, all the planets at one point or another go quote unquote retrograde, or they look like they're going backwards in the sky. Why is that? Well, whenever, if you can imagine, whenever a planet, they all go at different speeds, and they all have different ellipse patterns. So visually from Earth, there are times where a planet will either get ahead of us or behind us in our orbit. Does that make sense? So visually, it's almost like if a car goes, if you're driving in a car and a car goes in front of you, and then they stop and you keep going, right? You're still going in the same direction, and that car's not going backwards. Or if they slow down and all of a sudden you overtake it, it looks like the car is going backwards, but it's actually still going forwards. If that makes sense. Does that make sense, Jesse?
Oh, no, that's perfect.
So from the viewpoint of Earth, which is this car, it looks as if you're looking at a telescope in the sky, for certain amounts of time, a planet will go backwards, which is called retrograde, which if you're looking at a chart, it's denoted by the planet symbol, and then there's a tiny little R next to it. And that means that visually from Earth, it looks as if it's going backwards for a certain amount of time. And if you look at an ephemeris, which an ephemeris is the book that shows every single degree of every single planet on each day and time. So it's a great way. It used to be how people would plot charts, but now it's just used as a reference guide. Like if you're looking at a chart and you want to say, oh, well, when did this transit start? Then you can go back and find out to the degree when this transit started. But the ephemeris shows also, it typically will shade a column in the ephemeris, and it'll have the R, which means during this time period in the past or in the future, the planet is retrograde. Okay, so I hope that cleared a few things up. So Mercury, let's talk about in general, what kind of effect does a retrograde season or time period have on a planet? Well, all the planets, like I said, appear to be in retrograde throughout the year. And sometimes the outer planets like Pluto they could be in retrograde for several years, which I'm going to do a whole show on generational planets. I love talking about that, where literally something will be going on for 15 years. Same thing, like Pluto in retrograde or an aspect with Pluto. But when a planet is in retrograde, it essentially means that the power or the energy that planet puts out that affects us with tones down, goes to sleep, stops for a minute, or maybe even is a little bit in the reverse of it, if that makes sense. So if you can think about all the different planets and what they all mean, when they go in retrograde, it typically slows down, or sometimes it can take the positive aspects of it and maybe reverse the aspects a little bit. So the one that everybody talks about all the time, really the main one that everybody talks about who's not an astrologer, is Mercury. And one of the reasons for that is that A, it's the closest planet to us, and B, it goes retrograde more than any other planet during 1 year's time. It goes in and out of retrograde, typically about 3 times a year. And it's really nice to, at the beginning of each year, look up, it's real easy to Google it online, and find out and put it in your calendar those 3 times of the year that Mercury's going retrograde. So, what does that mean in terms of our lives and our environment when Mercury goes retrograde? Well, first of all, just like any planet, you think about what does Mercury rule if it's going retrograde. Mercury rules a lot of things. It rules any kind of communication, which means listening, speaking. It can be verbal communication. It can be written communication. It rules all the aspects of communication. So that means print, radio, TV, books, blogs, the internet communication, email, text, all those forms of communication, Mercury rules. Something else Mercury rules: contracts, leases. So in other words, communications or agreements between people that are binding or not. It could be a verbal agreement. It could be a contractual agreement. Leases, mortgages, all of those sorts of things. Wills, it rules wills. So any of those things Mercury rules. Mercury also rules anything having to do with transportation. Airplanes or flights, cars, trains, buses, boats, all of the above. It also rules the mail. So it rules shipping, packages, mailing things, the post office, having things shipped. So another thing that Mercury rules is a person's intellect or their quickness within their intellect. So a lot of times when Mercury's in retrograde, people will be forgetful. They will stumble over words or feel like they just can't find the right words for things. It's harder for them to communicate. So let's get into, now we know what it rules and we know what it affects. So let's talk about how to, what to do and what not to do during a Mercury retrograde. And then I like to say how to mitigate its effects, okay, in these different buckets. Okay, let's start with contracts, leases, deeds, agreements. Pretty much good time not to do any of that. Terrible time to sign a lease. Terrible time to enter some sort of contract with somebody. Typically, Mercury in retrograde lasts 3 weeks. I like to expand that to 2 days before and 2 days after Mercury retrograde. In fact, the strongest, I believe, times that it affects us is at the beginning and at the end of the retrograde. So you got to be really careful about that. So does that mean that, if you're trying to close on a house and the only time the people that you want to buy this house from can close is in the middle of a Mercury retrograde, that you do not do it? No, Although I have literally moved dates before because it's in a Mercury retrograde for house closings, but if you absolutely can't move the date, then what do? Well, it's okay. The sky, it doesn't mean that it's terrible, but what you do to mitigate it is, get another set of eyes on the agreement or the deed. Check your deed. Make sure that the deed is legitimate. Make sure that every single thing is in writing. Do not have anything verbal around this transaction at all. Make sure everything is in writing. Maybe have an extra meeting with the parties involved and just say, let's go through this contract together just to make sure we all understand each other. So there's little things like that can mitigate the confusion, because what Mercury's not a big negative thing that happens. The problems happen with leases, deeds, contracts, etc., wills, etc., because of confusion. It's two parties, the communication gets muddled. All the ease in communication, like what I understood was going to happen in this closing, the other party didn't understand it that way at all. So you just have to understand whatever you can do to alleviate confusion, to make things more black and white, to have safeguards. You get your, I can't remember what it's called, the deed insurance or title insurance. My God, if you have to close during a Mercury retrograde, buy title insurance. Buy double title insurance, right? If you can't switch the date. Okay, the other thing about Mercury retrograde is trips. A lot of people just don't travel during a Mercury retrograde. If you've got to get on a plane, make sure there are always delays. There could be mechanical issues with the plane. So if you've got to travel during a Mercury retrograde on a plane, make sure you've got plenty of time to be late. So don't get on a flight and just say, oh, the wedding's at 5, I'll land at 1. It'll give us enough time to get there. No, not in a Mercury retrograde. Go the day before, okay, just in case there are delays. If you're traveling overseas, Mercury rules not only travel, but it rules things like passports. So, make sure you've copied your passport and given it to loved ones that aren't traveling with you. So when you forget your passport or lose it, or if your luggage gets lost, if you're traveling during Mercury retrograde, get the luggage insurance, get the trip insurance. That's, if you can't move the trip, get the trip insurance. The other thing that people talk about Mercury retrograde, which is so true, is just relationships. This is not a good time to have the family meeting. This is not a good time to do the group therapy. This is not a good time to finally get up the nerve to go to your partner and say, I want us to fix our marriage, or I want us to get a divorce, or I want us to change the status of our relationship. I want us to get engaged. I want us to, any kind of heavy topic that a relationship, that you need to have in a relationship, or that a team needs to have together, right? Don't do it during a Mercury retrograde. Here's why. It's hard for people to understand each other during a Mercury retrograde. It's hard for people to come to alignment during a Mercury retrograde, right? So just wait. It's 3 weeks. Wait. People break up during Mercury retrograde. People have arguments. People have fights. They get lured into, what did he mean by that? And then you take it personally, and then you get in an argument. And that's not what he meant at all. Just cut everybody slack during a Mercury retrograde as to what they mean or don't mean. Okay, other small trips. Let me get back to trips for a second. Whenever there's a Mercury retrograde, sometimes I forget that it's in retrograde and my phone breaks, my computer breaks, or I'm driving down the road and it's 20 minutes longer to get to work because of all the accidents on the road. So drive more carefully. Don't go fast. Be more of a defensive driver, because people aren't paying attention. Also, things malfunction. Cars break down, malfunction, brakes don't work. lights don't work, give yourself extra time to get to work. All these things happen, I promise you, during a Mercury in retrograde. Another thing regarding equipment, it's a terrible time, you guys, to buy a computer, buy a phone, buy appliances for your house, buy a car, all those things. Just it's not a good time, you guys, to buy things. Anything of any substance. I mean, yes, go buy groceries. We all need to eat, but don't buy anything of any substance during a Mercury in retrograde. If you absolutely have to, make sure you've got a warranty on it. Don't buy anything that doesn't have a warranty. Keep the receipt. Ask when you're buying this piece of equipment, what's the return policy? Okay, if you have to, mitigate your circumstances. Okay? And there is no way I would just take Uber before I'd buy a new car if my car is broken down during a Mercury in retrograde until it's over. Then I would go buy a car. I wouldn't buy a car during a Mercury in retrograde. No way. So, I've talked to you guys a lot about all the scary, awful things about Mercury in retrograde. Well, there's actually a lot of good things too, you guys. So let's focus on that. And whenever there's a transit that is challenging, and I did this in my Saturn show. Everybody can't stand Saturn, and I think Saturn's awesome because if you know it's happening, focus on how you can get the most out of it. Here is a little known list of great things that can happen in Mercury in retrograde. One of my favorites is about relationships. So Mercury in retrograde, whenever the reverse of Mercury in retrograde is when things have stalled or things have broken or relationships have ended or there's been a falling out because of a fight, or my favorite thing, a misunderstanding, right? This happens to all of us. We have a friend and there was a misunderstanding and we just stopped talking to each other. Or a family member, there was a misunderstanding years ago, which led to a fight, which led to a let's not talk. Mercury in retrograde, all these things have this window of time to heal and get back together. So it's a wonderful time to reach out to that friend you've been estranged from or that family member you've been estranged from. This is the time when all the ex-girlfriends and ex-boyfriends resurface. There's always one or two that maybe you'll hear from on Facebook. Just watch this during Mercury in retrograde. It's crazy. You get, your ex-boyfriend from years ago wants to be your friend on Facebook. It could be as small as that. Or it could be, your ex-wife calls you and says, I know we're both remarried now and everything, and it's not that I want to get back together with you, but can we go have lunch and really try to make this closure cleaner, better, more loving, more compassionate? So it's a wonderful time for making up. It's a wonderful time for setting the record straight. It's a wonderful time for healing a misunderstanding. That's one of my favorite things about it, really. So on that same note, let's talk about business for a minute. A lot of contracts that have gone south, leases that have gone south. So it could be a house you've been looking at that fell through. Your dream house fell through. You couldn't get it. The last minute, the contract didn't go through. You're trying for a big sale, a big project, and you competed for it, and at the last minute, you lost, right? All those sorts of things. Guess what? Mercury in retrograde, crazy things happen. That house comes back on the market. Randomly, the broker calls you and says, it's back on the market. Everything fell through. Isn't that crazy? Or the people that bought it, they didn't know they were going to move in 6 months, but now they're moving. Happens all the time. Projects come back around. You thought you lost it. The team that's working on it failed or something changed, and all of a sudden they want to work with you. So things like that can happen to you just randomly, but it's a great time. Take advantage of this, you guys. Look through all the projects you lost. Look through, if you're in sales, look through all of the clients that didn't return your phone call, all of the people that you tried to get an appointment with and they were just too busy. those people probably during a Mercury in retrograde are going to find some time for you, or they're finally going to take your call, or you're finally going to get a breakthrough that you worked so hard for before and couldn't get. So those are all wonderful energies about a Mercury in retrograde. So in conclusion, you guys, I hope that you have learned what to watch out for during a Mercury in retrograde. Please get the retrograde times in your calendar. Also, how you can mitigate the effects, the negative effects of Mercury in retrograde. And then also my favorite part, how can you get great benefits out of a Mercury in retrograde? All right, thank you for joining me, and I will see you next time.